Well, it might be kind of hard to imagine today, but baseball really was a big deal in the late 1980s. And one baseball video game really stood out above all the rest. Well, if you're around my age, you know exactly what game I'm talking about, R.B.I. Baseball. It's certainly not the most realistic game, and it's probably not actually the best baseball game for the old NES, but man, this game is iconic. If you've ever played this game, just looking at it will bring back memories. It's got everything. You can steal bases. You can throw ridiculous pitches. And you can watch as big sluggers look bad. Now, the most notable thing about R.B.I. Baseball is probably the fact that there are only 10 teams, and that is kind of strange for a sport that had 26 teams at the time. It's pretty simple. This game includes all division winners from 1986 and 1987. This was easy, of course, because there were 8 different division winners those 2 seasons. The 2 remaining teams are the 1987 All-Star teams, but with a few changes. You see, they didn't want to have the same players repeated over and over again, so any players already in the game were simply replaced by different players on the All-Star teams. Well, the most notable All-Star replacement was Bill Schroeder, who winds up being the American League starting catcher. In real life, Schroeder never came close to being an All-Star. 1987 was probably his best year. He hit .332 with 14 home runs in a season notorious for high home run totals. And, well, Schroeder's one claim to fame is his inclusion in R.B.I. Baseball. On the National League side, Andres Galarraga plays first base in place of Jack Clark, who is already on St. Louis. And instead of Ozzie Smith, the National League starts Al Pedrique, a player you've likely never heard of. Pedrique was an absolute zero for the Mets in early 1987 before he was dealt to the Pirates for Bill Ellman. What doesn't make sense to me is that the programmers didn't use someone like Hubie Brooks instead, who actually was on the 1987 National League All-Star team. Similarly, Terry Kennedy of the Orioles was left off in favor of Schroeder. Well, I guess that's all water under the bridge these days. It's all trivial knowledge that people like me know. Anyway, the bigger question here is probably why in the world the game only had 10 teams. Sure, the game was originally released in Japan, but Nippon Pro Baseball had 12 teams in 1986, not 10. So let's go take a look. The 1986 Central League was probably the tightest race in Japanese baseball history. The final standings will tell you that the Hiroshima Toyo Carp beat out the Yomiuri Giants by a hair. Of course, you can clearly see that the Giants won more games. The difference came from tie ball games. Games would simply be called a tie if nobody won after 12 innings. Anyway, from what I can gather, the Giants and Carp came into the end of the season with the race virtually tied. The Giants wound up closing the season out with an 8-game winning streak. They did lose the next to last game of the season, however. They finished that one up with a win on the last day of the season. But in the end, Hiroshima was able to win out. Now, I've searched in vain on the internet for more information about this pennant race. Unfortunately, I'm not really aware of any baseball reference type resources for Japanese baseball to let me figure out the real story. And you know, while I do have this book about the 1994 Central League race, I don't know of anything similar for 1986. Well, the best resource that I found was a snippet from Warren Cromartie's book Slugging It Out in Japan. He described it best. The Giants had a 2.5-game lead with 3 games to go for them, but Hiroshima had 8 more games to play due to a number of rainouts. In the end, the Giants could only watch on television as Hiroshima barely squeaked past them. That's the sort of story you don't often hear that much about in baseball history, and I'm guessing that there's a reason for that. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing to admit that the team that won the pennant only did so because they had more tie games. Anyway, as you can imagine, all the excitement made baseball quite popular in Japan. Up to that time, the only baseball game on the Famicom was the original 1983 baseball. It's not an awful game, actually. Once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty good for its time. But there were no real teams or real players. And there were no baseball games after that, not until this one in December 1986. It's kind of strange when you consider how many Famicom baseball games there were in the end. The truth is that this game is the one that started everything. That would be Pro-Yakyū Family Stadium, the original Japanese version of R.B.I. Baseball. The first preview images of this game came out in Biweekly Famitsu in early November 1986. By late November, that little blurb had morphed into a major two-page feature. And in this issue dated December 12th, 2 days after the official release of the game, there was a massive feature devoted to the game. This included a full roster list of the 10 teams, including names and statistics. Now, there's a bit of confusion on places like Wikipedia about this game. The truth is that this game did feature real teams and real players, well, sort of. Team G, for example, is clearly the Yomiuri Giants. Matsumoto, for example, is Tadashi Matsumoto. Kuromate is clearly Warren Cromartie. Egawa is Suguru Egawa, and so on. Baasu is clearly Randy Bass, the star slugger for the Hanshin Tigers. And it makes sense to consider the T team to be called the Tigers. I'm pretty sure that C is the Hiroshima Toyo Carp based on the names. But that logic doesn't quite work everywhere, so there are some teams like R, F, and W that seem to be a mix of players from 2 or more teams. And believe me, you can go nuts trying to look all this stuff up, because I did. Most interesting, of course, is the team N. As described in the manual, this is the Namco Stars, a completely fictional team. You can tell because of their picture, PP, named after the game Pole Position. There's also a slugger named Paku, which seems to be short for Pac-Man. So it's not really a realistic baseball game, nor is it really a sim in the classic sense of a sim. But even still, the game is a lot of fun, and it's a pretty interesting relic of a bizarre year in Japanese baseball. And of course, that's not everything worth noting about R.B.I. Baseball. As you might already know, there are 2 versions of this game in the United States. The licensed version is a little bit less common. The one most of us grew up playing was this black cartridge version, though I don't think there's a huge difference in value between the two. Now, the story behind this is pretty simple. Back in those days, Nintendo tried to force all third-party video game creators to go directly through its system. This was a system designed to give Nintendo the lion's share of profits from the sale of all video games. Well, the old story is that the old Atari systems failed because anybody could make games for it. So Nintendo worked really hard in the United States to restrict other companies. They wanted to make sure that they had to have their seal of quality on any product that was made for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Its efforts focused around this chip, the famous lockout chip. Nintendo games would have this Nintendo seal of quality on the front, which was supposed to be some kind of guarantee of quality. Of course, if you've already played these games, you know that that's not really a guarantee. The biggest irony here, of course, is that the Famicom in Japan didn't have any sort of lockout chip, not that I'm aware of at least, and yet it did just fine on the market. Anyway, there was a shortage of chips in mid-1988, right around when R.B.I. Baseball first came out. Or at least there was a reported shortage. There are some who think Nintendo was restricting supply for monopolistic reasons. Tengen knew that R.B.I. Baseball would be a hit. After all, it had been a major hit in Japan a year and a half earlier. So when those old boxes say more than 2 million sold worldwide, it's actually referring specifically to Japan, where about 2 million copies of Family Stadium sold within a year of the original release. It was also pretty clear that R.B.I. Baseball was the baseball game to get when it was first featured in Nintendo Power. Now, this might really be trivial, but Nintendo Power had R.B.I. Baseball listed as the 10th most popular NES game in September 1988. In the November issue, issue 3, it had dropped to 21st place, still quite good for a sports game. But by Christmas time, this game had vanished from official Nintendo publications, never to return. Tengen, for its part, made sure that there were plenty of copies out there, and its theft of the lockout chip technology source code made it so that the game actually would work on Nintendo's machine. You see, Tengen had managed to get the source code from, I think it was the US Patent or Copyright Office, through a claim that was probably fraudulent. But the interesting truth is that this classic might have really been a rare game if Tengen weren't willing to engage in sneaky behavior to get past the lockout chip. Now, the other fascinating thing about this game is that it lives on to this day. There's a small but thriving modding community out there creating updates. You can find a version with every 1986 MLB team, for example. There's also a classic version with 1927 teams. Most of those versions don't correct the problems with this game, of course. There are glitches that work in every version I've played. One famous glitch allows you to get a home run on a bunt if you place it just right. It's not easy to get this to work, but it's absolutely hilarious when it does. There's another glitch that allows you to throw the ball away to trick the computer into advancing a runner, making it easy for you to throw them out. And the biggest strategy of all, of course, is to take Willie Randolph out of the American League All-Stars and replace him with Mark McGwire. You see, pinch hitters get a power boost. When I was a kid, I used to be able to get McGwire to hit a home run on the first pitch of the game every time. I'm not quite as good as I used to be, sadly, but if you practice enough, you can get it to work. All glitches and cheats aside, though, this is a baseball game that still holds up to this day. The replay value is pretty high. And if you can get a second person to play with you, it's actually a ton of fun. Well, it's fun, sure, but it honestly is not the best baseball video game of all time. In fact, it's not even the best one on the NES. Anyway, stick around with me and we'll have a look at some of the others, and you can decide for yourself which one you like the best.